happy week of Juneteenth, and I'm excited for this conversation and this webinar. So, Liv, I think you're going to kick it off. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's great to see everyone. And thank you for joining. Just a reminder, so this webinar is being recorded today, so that we can share it with our clients who weren't able to make it, add it to our website and on our YouTube channel. However, that being said, your videos will not be part of that recording, nor will your comments and questions in the chat. So if you do have the ability to, we'd love to see your face on camera, but no pressure there. We have a really great session planned today. We have two presenters that we would like to share with you all. So first, we're going to hear from our investment analyst, Christian Giadolor, for a 10-minute markets update. He's going to give you the rundown on what the investments team is paying closest attention to right now. And we'll have a couple minutes for questions in there. That said, this will probably be only about 10 minutes. So if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you afterwards to answer those. And then, as Max said, in honor of Juneteenth, we're really honored to have this conversation and Q&A with Sahana Mehta. Sahana is the Director of Donor Organizing for Liberation Ventures, which is an organization that's focused on shifting narratives, both personal and political, around reparations and accelerating grassroots efforts across the country to implement systems of reckoning and repair. So every time I've talked to Sahana, I've learned so much already. So I think you're all really going to enjoy that conversation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Christian for the next 10 minutes or so to give our markets update.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liv. Happy Tuesday. Happy Pride. I'm really excited to share a brief market update of what's been happening in the world of stocks and bonds. Let me jump into screen share.
Keep jumping.
Okay. Um, are you able to see my screen?
No,
Um, um, Give me just one moment.
I don't know about you guys, but for those of you on the call over 60, I just love it when someone who's in their 30s struggles with technology. Thank you. You just made my day. Go ahead.
Yes, we're all still learning and working through Zoom together. Uh, Awesome. Well, to start, I wanted to highlight what's been happening in the markets over these past 3 months. And the month of March coincided with the beginning of America's war on Iran, which resulted in the stock market going down as fuel costs surged and the Strait of Hormuz, a key place for travel and supply chains globally, was shut down. And we've seen that the fuel costs have remained elevated. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed and heavily restricted. But as March turned into April, April into May, the market kind of moved past the war on Iran, especially here domestically in the United States. And so the S&P fully recovered and reached new heights, up about 10% since the beginning of March. However, this story and recovery has not been for everyone. It's been a very uneven recovery. And I've talked a little bit about a K-shaped economy, a term used to describe the households driving spending and the households not. And we have a K-shaped stock market as well. Semiconductors have been up nearly 47% in the past 3 months, compared to just 10% for the S&P 500. The reason for this is because semiconductors are uniquely positioned in the AI build out narrative. The chips used in to create semiconductors are packaged together into the computers that are put into data centers, and those are the computers that AI models are trained upon. So semiconductors as a sector has been one of the clearest proxies of the AI build-out narrative playing out in the market. And that has really been illustrated in this K-shapedness of returns. And really beneath the hood here, I have an analytic that really goes to highlight key theme that we've seen in the markets in these past couple of months, but really a defining feature for this decade, and that has been the degree to which the markets are concentrated. The When the markets were down for the month of March, everyone felt that pain. But as the markets have recovered, it's been a very sharp increase in crowding into a handful of names. And this concentration in this top heavy market has meant that only some of the companies in the markets have experienced this rally, while the rest of the market has lagged. Now, beneath this AI story is actually an AI divide. Not everyone in AI is winning. While AI infrastructure, which is semiconductors, but also relates to power, compute, some of the energy necessary to fuel these computers, those have been soaring. And that has happened while software has actually lagged. Software has struggled since the start of the year due to displacement concerns. And really, the reason for this is that you can use an AI model, and with some clever prompting, an individual can ask for the model to produce a custom software that can be flexible and nimble to an individual's unique situation and circumstance. Now, AI has a tendency to hallucinate. These softwares are never perfect. However, as the AI frontier models improve and get better, these softwares have improved as well. And those fears and those concerns that individuals will stop paying large amounts for software subscriptions and instead will pivot to AI has been a key driver for why software as a sector has lagged in the midst of semiconductors really rallying. And this is why the stories around Mythos and Fable and some of these latest innovations on the frontier model side have been so important to not just the performance of the technology, but also the stock market and who's been winning and who has been losing. Now, pivoting away from stocks, I wanted to focus on fixed income, inflation, and the war on Iran. Now, when the war started, we saw a sharp increase in the cost of oil and fuel costs from $60 a barrel to well over $100 a barrel. And fuel costs ultimately peaked under $120 a barrel, which was lower than what many analysts predicted. However, the cost of oil remains anchored at a level that is inflationary for the global economy. And one of the reasons why oil maybe didn't go up as much as anticipated was because of a lot of the announcements being made by this current administration calling for ceasefires, stating that the war is over. And I wanted to put that on this price chart to show that over these past few months, we've had a lot of announcements, starts and stops of the war, that negotiations are happening, that peace has been done, only for hostilities and tensions to remain. Of course, we all are all awaiting June 19th and the end of this week for the supposed end of the war and the official signing of a peace deal. But this deal is actually just a deal to commence further negotiations. And we expect that these headlines and news of potential delays to the negotiations will likely continue to put pressure on oil. Regardless, it will take months, weeks, if not months, for supply chains to begin to normalize in the Strait of Hormuz, where traffic continues to be slow. And so these fuel costs have, and also food costs as well, have helped to trigger a reacceleration of inflation. We came out of these past couple of years with inflation leveling down and slowly but surely marching towards target. But now we've begun to deviate from that as fuel costs have transferred over into a broader inflationary environment for the entire economy. And so headline CPI or headline inflation has gone up, but also the measure that the Federal Reserve uses to dictate monetary policy, or the PCE, core PCE, has also gone up. And that signal has been one of the key drivers for what's happened to Fitz income market, where the markets are not pricing in a rate cut, which I think many observers and investors were anticipating with the new Federal Reserve chair. And instead, the market is now pricing in a rate hike by the end of 2027. And this coincides with what we've seen in other developed world economies, where in the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank have also begun to increase their rates. So while the stock market has kind of moved past the war in Iran, we still are in an inflationary environment that has put pressure on Fitz income, that has catalyzed a new wave of inflation, and has put some pressure on households domestically and globally. So with that, I'll stop and see what questions may have. I'm going to jump out of screen share as well.
Thank you, Christian. I have a comment. I was laughing to myself, thinking, as I look at the market's reaction, this continued sort of whipsawing back and forth every time Trump says there's a peace deal and the market responds, and then there isn't a peace deal and the market responds. It makes me think that it isn't just AI that hallucinates, but in fact, the equity market is bound for hallucination as well. The bond market, not so much. But that's been historically true, that the bond market tends to be a better, how to put it, voting machine on reality, more so than the equity market. So that's just kind of very interesting and a little disturbing, but not really new. That is to say, this is a historical pattern. This isn't that new that the market does this kind of thing, the stock side. Well, the bond side is a bit more in sobriety, let us say. Questions, comments, things you didn't understand? We'll give you just a second. Where's Chicory invested in these trends? Great question. I'll say a couple things, and then Christian, you can say a couple things. On the fixed income side, we have tended to be very conservative and have held the position now for more than 2 years that inflation was not over, and that the inflation problems that were first seen during COVID and the supply side disruptions were not just going to go away because we were in more of a macro rotation to an inflationary environment. And by that, I mean there were structural things in the economy that were going to push inflation higher. This is before the Iran war or oil. It really related to climate change being fundamentally inflationary, mass immigration or attempts at mass immigration being fundamentally inflationary, demographic situation being inflationary. So there were a number of things that made us think that we should be very careful on the fixed income side to not get caught out by taking positions in longer term bonds, because if you're in a position in a longer term bond and interest rates rise, that bond price declines. So I think that call has been a consistent one for us. On the investment side, we've been very leery of the concentration in the market, and haven't bought the Kool-Aid completely, or drunk the Kool-Aid, better metaphor, around, not to say that the AI story isn't real, but concerns that it was overhyped, et cetera, et cetera. Christian, I think it's safe to say that of late, we know that AI is here to stay in some form. We're not putting Pandora back in her box. But it's pretty soon to tell exactly what that precisely means and who the winners and losers are. But I know, for example, you can speak to, where we are, for example, in software and where we were in software. Do you want to speak to that for a second, Christian?
I completely agree with that synthesis, Matt. And on the AI story in particular, on software, when I showed that chart of where software has gone down, but really that story is really about understanding for each software company how they're being affected by AI particularly. So there are some software companies like Salesforce who have invested into AI or building out Agent Force as a key part of their future business. And while we have concerns about what their terminal value might be or where they might end up in the long term, they are a company that we have maintained as a company to invest into. Whereas some software companies we have decided to either not invest into or to completely remove from our portfolio due to risk around AI being used by consumers to do things like taxes. An example of this would be Intuit, where for TurboTax in particular, their recent earnings call showed that consumers are price sensitive, and that for some consumers, they were able to use AI and other tools to do their taxes instead of their TurboTax software. And so it's still an emerging story, and these models are updating and changing constantly. But I think the market is trying to react to a present state of what the future reality might look like for these software companies. And then on the semiconductor side, we are trying to stay away from some of the big hype names like Marvel Technology or Micron and are really focused on the semiconductors that are providing a lot of value and that are the highest quality names in the sector.
Yeah. So, and also just allocation wise, just in terms of how much equity versus how much bond versus how much cash, whatever, we've tended to be as a firm pretty conservative around that because we're financial planners first and foremost. So we're constantly looking at when are people going to need the money and how much are they going to need and how do we make sure the money's there when they need it, which means you've got to be careful about how much risk you take with the money that they're going to need when they need it. So, with very few exceptions, are we all in on a stock side, or all in on what we might call the risk side. Most of our clients have a mix of cash, bonds, alternative investments, and equities. And as a firm right now, if you just looked at our book, like how we're overall invested as a total firm, we're about 63% on the equity side, and the rest is in fixed income or cash. So, and that's by design because most of our clients are in a position where they, in the not too distant future, if not now, are having to consume their assets over time or use those assets to live on. So that means we're very risk sensitive. And I think if you queried me or Christian or Daniel or any of our advisors, we would say that the concentration in this market makes us all very, very nervous.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
one hiccup in one big story and down she falls. So of course, I've been waiting for that down for a long time. I've been even praying for it because I fucking hate it. I think it's all just a bunch of blue smoke and mirrors on some of this stuff, and it annoys me just personally. Not that I want anybody's economic situation or financial situation to get hurt, but I mean, sometimes you just look at this and you're like, how is this happening? And when you look around at the broader economy and what's happening, it's really kind of a bit much. I live on an island where Mark Zuckerberg recently visited with his super yacht. We're not that kind of island, but he stopped in anyhow. He was not greeted warmly. He's gone now. He's back to Seattle, but it's just like, really? Anyhow, I digress. It's time to move on. Thank you so much, Christian. We appreciate you and appreciate your work. And Liv, would you like to make introduction to the next portion of the program, or do you want me to jump right in? Want me to jump right in? Okay, great. So, Sahana, come on off mute. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Morning. And we're going to talk about reparations. And we did a little pre-interview, Sahana and I and Liv, and I said to her, I consider myself a very strong ally, super politically progressive, activist, etc. But when you say reparations, I'm like, oh man, how much is this going to cost? And I have the feeling I'm not alone. So I want to play the role of like this, not the skeptic. Skeptic would be too strong, but the sort of like, help me understand what this means. What are we really talking about when we're talking about reparations and reconciliation and all of those things? Help me, help us frame this conversation in a way that makes it approachable and explainable um, to the average, white liberal ally, for lack of a better characterization.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be here with you all and to see some friendly faces. It was so nice to meet Yvonne at the Women Donors Network gathering, and of course to see Ellie, who I get to see all the time. But yes, which is wonderful. So really just taking a step back, I'll share a little bit about Liberation Ventures and what we do, and then get into the heart of that question. And I just want to say that I so enjoyed our pre-interview last week because Max was going in and asking those hard questions. And I think oftentimes in some of the progressive spaces that we're in, people may feel afraid to ask the questions that are really on their minds for fear of seeming like they aren't politically aligned or woke enough or whatever it might be. And so I just want to join Max in taking those guardrails off of this conversation and in saying that you can ask me anything. And I'm really excited and interested in that type of conversation. So Liberation Ventures is a field catalyst and an intermediary funding the reparations movement and funding work towards a culture of repair in the United States. So what does that really mean? It means that we grant make dollars out to grassroots organizations across that movement, and it means that we do our own work to accelerate it. And so we do work on three key pillars, narrative change being one of them, and I'll talk more about that as we go. Another being building capacity and connective tissue. So that means supporting the movement to be stronger than the sum of its parts, to move through conflict, to build their own muscle around fundraising or other issues, telling the stories that they need to tell in their own audience bases to move the needle on reparations. And then finally, mobilizing resources. So we grant make, as I've said, and do donor organizing to resource the work. So that's just a little bit about LV. It's been around since 2020. It was founded by Aria Florent and Garrett Neiman. Aria is our CEO and co-founder. And they really founded it as a response to some of the research that Aria had done while at McKinsey on the racial wealth divide. And so when she was doing work with McKinsey's Black Economic Mobility Institute, she realized just how vast this racial wealth divide is and how it would take over 200, if white wealth stopped growing today, it would take over 228 years for Black wealth in this country to catch up by those statistics. And so really realizing that she wondered like what is the durable real way to address this problem, and that's how we came to reparations and repair as an organization. So that's a little bit of the background, and then what do we mean by reparations? So we think of reparations first and foremost. Reparations are not just cash. Reparations may include cash, it may include the dollars, but they are also policy and cultural programs that will facilitate repair. And when we say repair in this context, we're talking about a four-step process, and it's modeled off of the United Nations definition, which has been used in processes across the world around truth, reconciliation, and repair. And really, the four steps are reckoning, acknowledgement, accountability, and redress. And I can show some graphics later on. And I'm happy to go into details about any of those steps. But we believe those are the four key components of any good repair process, whether that is on the individual level or the societal level. So also can go into that too. But I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, so do those two things. First off, Garrett Neiman, for those of you who may have been tracking our webinars in the past, Garrett was actually on. We had Garrett on a year or so ago, maybe almost 2 years, shortly after his book came out. And the book is now completely escaping me, the name of it. We'll have to Google it. But essentially what Garrett was doing and continues to do is organize white men to be better allies around many things. Certainly race is one of them, but also for women, etc., and sort of white men organizing for white men in this progressive space. So Garrett is a bit of a pioneer in that, I think. And so it's
Awesome.
interesting to me. When I read that he was a co-founder, I was like, oh, go Garrett. I like it. That's great.
Yeah,
So that was one thing I wanted to point out. But the other thing is, would you hit those 4 steps again? You said
absolutely. Reckoning,
rec,
acknowledgement,
acknowledgement,
accountability, and
accountability,
redress.
accountability, and redress. And so I do think, because this is a more synthetic process than people raising their hands and saying, I was harmed, give me money.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like this horrible, like kind of like, what does it mean? And I would like you to kind of talk us through what that more synthetic process looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we'll start there and then we can talk about like examples of that. I have an example from in my, not in my personal life, but of a friend who had this. So we can talk about that. But would you, like, what's the difference between these steps? Tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to talk about them on 2 levels. I want to talk about them on both the individual level and the societal level or structural levels, governmental, etc. So when we think about reckoning, what comes up when we think about that word? Often I think about the term grappling. I think about kind of like that tug of war that I might be doing internally to understand either what I've done, what somebody else has done, just what has happened, some harm that has happened. And so that is really the first step. So some examples of that could be you interpersonally between yourself and a friend, maybe reckoning with the harm that was caused through a conflict in your relationship. That could also look like Max and I talked about the example of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which was a foundation that recently went through a reckoning process to understand some of the harms their founder had caused, racialized harms their founder had caused, and then to understand what their role is in righting those harms. So that process of understanding, maybe it's researching, uncovering, that is really what the reckoning looks like. But on a more at the government level, I'll give the example. I know I heard some of you are based in New Jersey and Georgia. So to give some color to that, in New Jersey, for example, over the last few years, a community-based reparations council has come into being through the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and they were able to produce a harms report to identify the harms of enslavement and subsequent harms from its legacies in New Jersey, and to really research all of the different axes upon which harm was caused, whether that is in healthcare, incarceration, economic mobility, so on and so forth. And so that is also a part of the reckoning at that structural level. And then moving to acknowledgement, this one feels simpler. It feels more straightforward. You acknowledge what has happened, acknowledge the harm that has been caused. So that could look like, in the case of an individual, you being able to really recount and share with the friend that you may have harmed that you know what you did and you understand that its impact and you're acknowledging it. In the case of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, it might be the blog post that they did detailing the harms that were caused and the process that they're undertaking. And in the case of the state of New Jersey, I'll send you all a link. But later this week, there is a webinar focused on a bill that is basically working to encourage the state to admit its role and responsibility in enslavement in New Jersey and to encourage its teaching, the history of enslavement teaching in New Jersey public schools. And so that may be another form of acknowledgement. Thank you, Ellie. It was good to see you. Um, and then moving towards accountability and redress. Accountability can look a lot of different ways as well, but it's really taking that next step on the acknowledgement and kind of starting to understand, why did this harm occur? Why did I cause this harm? What were some of the patterns that I may need to root out in order for this not to happen again? And how do I commit to non-repetition of this? How do I really meaningfully move towards that? And I won't go into each kind of series of examples, but that's a little bit of how we think about accountability. And then finally, redress is, what does it look like to make this situation, this person, this society whole again after the harm was caused? And so redress could include the financial, but redress could also include the cultural, the policy, the different programs that we have. So for example, in the case of Fulton County in Georgia, they produced they had a county-based commission for reparations commission, and they were able to produce their harms report. And now the next step for them will be producing a repair report. So what are some of the ideas that they want to put into play to repair those harms? And so this will be really their policy proposal and other proposals that they want to bring to the table. So that's another way of looking at redress.
Yeah, and this, I mean, I'm struck by the fact that this is very difficult human work. Because, I mean, just thinking on the interpersonal level, to come to terms with the fact that you've harmed someone and admit it, like, that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard. You have to really be committed to want to restructure that relationship. And in the case of race in our country, for example, I don't need to, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here to talk about the ways in which we're trying to, like, just please put a lid on that. Like, we didn't want to talk about it 100 years ago. We certainly don't want to talk about it now. Can't we all it's like, can't we all just get along and move on? Can't we just ignore all this stuff? And yet we see the enormity of what happens when you don't address these things. So it's really, it's a really powerful idea and not easy, right? I mean, like I'm telling you what you don't already know. Like, so that, I mean, I'm going to give an example of something I think of as part of this process, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about what you refer to as your narrative change work, because this idea that, like, being able to tell the story. I can speak to this as an individual. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So you're doing something specific in relationship to, I don't know where. Do you want to come off mute and talk about this for just a second? Feel free. Kristen, where are you? Would you like to do that? If the answer
I
is
mean,
no.
I can. I don't also have to. I'm like packing, and I just am really excited about this, and also just have a story to share that has been in process. I'm a client of Chicory, and also am um like have been in a really hard relationship. It's a long story, and just really been invested in this space, and so happy to see this webinar, and just want to say, like, happy to connect and share as a client and someone who's been on this practice and process, and would love to see more ways to invest, but also to take on repair. I'm doing ancestral work. We're talking about this in a white ancestral group that I'm a part of, and so um as an individual and a family is one way. There's organizational, there's municipalities, there's like, we wish for the larger world, but just wanted to come on and say hi and thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I'm here.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Well, the story I was going to relate very briefly was, several years ago now, a person came to us and who is still a client, and she was the recipient of a reparations payment that came in the form of some material, but also in the form of money, as a consequence of her family history in Germany, where family of hers, direct immediate relatives, had their property taken by Nazi Germany. They were Jews and they fled. I don't think a chunk of the family, as I understood it, did not make it out. A chunk of the family did. But she was in receipt of money and art that had been returned to her. And it's an example of that country going through a process, I assume. I mean, it was a governmental thing. And Sahana, you and I also talked about the placards. I saw placards in Amsterdam, and you mentioned another.
Yeah.
Speak to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about we talk about this term, a culture of repair, and so it took me a minute to really, as I came onto the team, to understand really what do we mean by that, and how do we make sure that that's not just words that people like to say that don't have substance behind them, but I quickly started to understand how important it is that we pursue a culture of repair. And when I say that, I mean a culture where we have the skill and will to repair harm whenever it's caused. So that is why we see the work of that repair in our relationships as so vital, because we believe that if we are able to do that in our relationships with one another, we will have more willingness to pursue that at the macro level, at the societal level, and to expect that of each other, of our government, etc. And so just to click on that for a second, but the what Max and I talked about last week were the Stolpersteinem, and I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation, in Germany, where there are, I haven't gotten to see them myself yet, but where there are essentially kind of stones in the street that cause you to almost trip up or to get out of your routine of walking in order to realize the history of the Holocaust that has happened, with the last known location of a Holocaust victim at that place. And so it is a way that Germany has instated public memory, so that we can be in a continual process of reckoning and acknowledgement and understanding of that history. And so, what would it look like for us here in the US to have examples like that? I mean, right now we're here together on the eve of America's 250th, and we are seeing the monuments of found slaveholders who held over thousands of people and slaves being brought into our nation's capital, and those who have contributed to civil rights and other forms of movement work being erased. So what would it look like if we could start to instill that type of memory in our country too? Yeah.
So, yeah, what would it look like? Right. Talk a little bit about the work you have done around narrative structures that help people come to understanding and appreciation of this concept, idea, this culture of repair.
Absolutely. So for the last several years now, Liberation Ventures has been working on narrative research. We've partnered with research firms in order to complete this. And so I'll send you all later the information so you can see full qualitative research summaries and audience segmentation reports. But for now, I want to show you our favorite tool that's really come out of this work. And so can you all see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So this is the reparations belief arc. And so again, this is based on the research that we've done over the years, and it essentially identifies how we have found that people in America move from opposition to support for reparations over time. And we have done subsequent message testing to understand what messages move people along this arc. So for example, somebody in the opposition may believe that slavery does not impact the present and no change is needed. And the first step that we need to get them to is that slavery and its legacies impact the present. Just accepting that very basic, that idea, or accepting even the idea that history and its legacies impact the present, and then moving towards slavery. And so the steps continue going, and you see these underneath some of the steps, you'll see labels like the accountability gap, hope gap, mobilization gap, and temporal gap. And so we focus in our own messaging on some of these areas in order to target people that may live within that gap. So for example, if you see between steps 4 and 5, between reparations are the way to make things right and reparations are possible, there is a hope gap because people do not believe that they're possible for so many reasons. But it is incumbent upon us to demonstrate that reparations work has been done before in this country and in other countries around the world, to demonstrate its feasibility so that people can move up this arc. And the letters below just refer to the audience segments that we've tested. And so just to give you a flavor for one of them, this is a demographic profile that's more likely to be white women, college educated, and democratic. And we found that this segment tended to be in the hope gap. So some believe that reparations are possible, but many did not. And so there are a few different observations that we have here, but one of the ones that I'd highlight is that for this group, it became clear to us that we need to highlight the belief that reparations are possible, and cultivate an interest in mobilizing folks for action. So there's some more there, but anyways, just to give you a sense of how the research has aided us. But to go back here, the belief arc now is really a fundamental part of our narrative strategy. So for America's 250th, we're deploying a number of campaigns through Liberation Ventures and through organizations that we funded. We seeded a pooled fund of over $1 million, and we're able to fund over 22 groups to make their own narrative interventions. And they are using the belief arc to ground their messaging. So we have projects. Each project is targeting a specific segment on the belief arc and trying to move that audience up one step, because we've found that you can really only move people one step at a time. So this is kind of the basis now for the work, and we'll continue to iterate on this arc over time with the learnings from our various campaigns. I'll stop there.
Are there so there are groups that clearly are persuadable? Have you identified like yeah, don't even bother. Like we're not gonna, this is like trying to teach a pig to sing, like it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I mean, the opposition is
Be
certainly
negative. I
challenging.
don't want to focus there, but just like, curiosity, right?
Yeah. No, opposition is certainly a challenging group. We're not focusing our resources in the opposition right now,
Yeah.
understandably. And this totally becomes a resource allocation question too. We raise every dollar that we grant and that we use, and so we only get to choose so many targets to have, both for our own work and for the work that we fund. And so we've been funding and working largely in the middle chunk of the arc. So between the 2 and the 5 is kind of the sweet spot that a lot of our projects are working in right now, because we find that to be where a lot of our target demographics live, and also where we actually have some of the messaging and the capacity to intervene in the narratives. And we're a little less interested right now in focusing our resources and moving groups from a 6 to a 7, though later on we may decide that that's strategic for certain reasons, like whether it's locally, there's a reparations commission on the ground and they need support from the community. So really what we need to do is move people from a 6 to a 7, but it'll always be a mix of a resource question, a political expediency question, and a messaging clarity question.
Got it. Very interesting. So, one of the things I was curious about, or I guess maybe struck me, was that most of your work right now, correct me if I'm wrong, is helping people understand that this is a policy. These are policy issues. These are governmental issues. And that's where the focus of your work is. Not to say that individuals don't have their individual work to do on their individual history. And if you live in the South for any length of time, I'm not originally from the South, but if you live in the South for any length of time, and you have friends who have lived in the South for most of their lives, you will meet people who are well aware that their family history is involved in slavery in some form or fashion, if they are white or if they are Black, right? Not that as slaveholders, but perhaps as slaves. That's kind of ubiquitous. So there's this individual thing, but right, yes, that's mine. But then there's this more policy oriented thing, and you're focusing on helping people understand that the government has a role, that they're at whatever levels it is, municipalities, right, states.
Yeah, so absolutely. When we use the term reparations, we do use it to refer to state-based action to repair the harms of slavery and its legacies. And we're very specific about that, not to undermine other forms of repair that people are undertaking, because we think they're incredibly important and they're often a step on that journey to the goal and North Star that we really have in the longer term. But we want to be careful with that term so as not to dilute it or misconstrue the meaning of it, because it's a term that is already so weaponized across so many spaces. It's one that, your immediate, many Americans' immediate reaction rather is an eyebrow raise or something worse. And so we need to really do the work to protect the term so that we can be really clear when we're talking about it. And then to go to your question, or some of what you were sharing as well, I'll go here. This is our reparations grant making blueprint. And so this is a longer document that we built alongside movement leaders from across the reparations movement. We launched this document about a year ago, and it is our own strategy for Liberation Ventures grant making over the next 10 years. And it is also what we share with other funders and philanthropists in the space to help them understand the type of capital and investment that the reparations movement requires in order to succeed in this goal. So as you see here, the goal that we're really driving towards over these next 10 years is to make reparations common sense and commonplace. And what we mean by that is common sense is that it is something that people can understand as, yes, of course we should repair this harm. We understand the nature of the harm, and we understand that in order for our society to be made whole again, we must repair it. And commonplace just means that we need to be seeing these initiatives all around us, so that I wouldn't be the first one telling any of you about a reparations effort in your locale because you already knew about it. You already saw it on your Instagram. It was already there. And so this is really what we're driving towards. And we've identified that the movement requires $220 million over the next 10 years in order to make this work happen. And we've broken it down across some pillars. So we have high priority pillars, medium priority pillars, and lower priority pillars. And so we've found that investing in state and local reparations, mass movement, and narrative change will be the three most important things that we can do to drive towards that goal of common sense and commonplace in this 10-year period. Now, that doesn't mean that the other things are not important. It just that means that what requires the most investment in order to see the most catalytic change will be these three areas, and so on and so forth. And there's a variety of KPIs included in this document to show what we're trying to drive towards over time. But I just say that to say that we see it all, it's all related and it's all part of the work, but what requires the investment in order to create the conditions we need is a different question. And so this is also a really interesting graphic that I love because it shows the way that the investment priority for each pillar could change over time. So whereas if you'll see here, like right now, federal is low priority for obvious reasons, but then within 25 years, it could completely, which hopefully it will completely shift and become a high investment priority. State and local may get a little bit lower over time. So it's not to give a specific fixed value to any one of these pillars. It's to say that in our current conditions, this is what's important to invest in at scale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then to ask the question in terms of funding, because that's, it's a big piece of what I mean, all these things require a commitment of time and energy and monetary commitment. As someone who's, very involved in progressive philanthropic work more broadly, I keep hearing and hearing and hearing how individual funders, big like foundations that would have funded this work 4 years ago or 5 years ago, amongst other kinds of work, are pulling back. They're pulling in their horns because of the political environment. Is that you've experienced this? Yes.
Yeah, we've experienced it, and we've also witnessed it from our own grantees' experiences. We fund over 45 organizations across the reparations movement, and so we support them in ways beyond the funding as well, and we're in regular conversation with them, and so they have seen politically based funder retrenchment, pullback, and also just shifting portfolios. So even if a funder is not necessarily saying we're reneging on your commitment, it may be we've come to the end of this grant cycle. Maybe you would have gotten a renewal because all the work has been going well, but actually our portfolio priorities have changed because right now this is risky. So we've seen all sorts of dynamics at play. Yeah.
Cluck, cluck, cluck. Right? It's like, yeah, interesting. Well, so tell us, you strike me as you're obviously very engaged. It's a very sophisticated effort. I mean, you look at the graphs and the plan, etc. Just speaking to you personally, what are you, tell me what you're most worried about.
Yeah.
Tell me what you're most, tell me where your hope lies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm most worried about I mean, in my day-to-day is having conversations with funders, prospective donors, and funders, and trying really to usher them along this belief arc in our conversation, not through like uh, messaging campaign, but really through our individual conversation. And so I think, going back to the very beginning of this conversation, we have to take the mask off. We have to take the guardrails off. I'm looking for the language, but we need to be able to have the conversation and share what we're thinking authentically with each other directly. And so we're having a great conversation and you're nodding along, that's not serving either of us if you're really harboring this question of like, girl, this seems impossible. Like, what are you talking about?
Right,
So
right.
that's something that worries me is that I really want people to be asking the questions that are on their minds, because this is what it will take in order to build more durable, broader support for the work. Um, and of course, it's worrisome that funders are shifting away from some of this work, and some may retreat. So I think it's also just how do we ensure we're building authentic relationships with people who, after conversation, will be willing to support the work, and also the types of relationships that we love the most are the ones where we can support each other mutually. So I love working with people like Ellie, who's on the call earlier, because it's not just that Ellie is giving Liberation Ventures funds, but it's also that we are able to work with her to engage the WDN audience, or that she is able to consider whether she wants to write on behalf of or through her own story to share why she supports the work of reparations, to move people up the belief arc that I couldn't because of my own identities, the audience segment that I might fall in. So really just wanting to build authentic relationships across the across different audiences in order to support the work. I think there was a second part of your question. Let me know if I missed it.
Well, I mean, you're touching on what might give you hope, but I was like, hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what gives me hope is seeing the scale of the work that is happening. I have learned so much about what is going on the ground over the last year since I started at Liberation Ventures, and it's, I mean, I'm very impressed. There are, by the movement itself, there are campaigns going on across the country right now for Juneteenth through July 4th in what we're calling a week of repair activation. There are city and state efforts that many of us don't totally understand the nature of, or that are happening. And so I'm just excited to continue to get the word out there to people that this work is happening, because that's what's going to demonstrate feasibility, and that's what's going to make my job easier over time, is being able to show this is possible, this is happening, and it gives us all hope. So I think seeing that the work is going, and also that this is a really intergenerational movement, and I have gotten to meet elders in the movement from the time that I started, and people my age who are doing the work. So some people have been in this movement since the civil rights movement, and others are just coming in. But it's beautiful to see, and also I'll say that it's also beautiful to see that it's a multiracial movement, and that even somebody like me, a South Asian person, has a place to live within this movement, and that I feel belonging, and I haven't felt a sense of out of placeness, because we're all working towards a society with a stronger chance at repair. And one of the quotes that we think about a lot is from Isabel Wilkerson in the book Caste, about how we're all, when people might ask you, why should I care about this? I wasn't here when slavery happened. My family wasn't here at all. Um, we are all now living in a house with a crumbling and broken foundation. And if we want to keep living in that house, we're going to need to come together to fix it. And so that idea also gives me hope.
Yeah, I love the framing of it as a culture of repair, and you can just that framing cuts across so many other possibilities. I mean, I'm thinking about the criminal justice system and the way it's currently structured, and the way, like all of the things, as well as the very foundations of this country. When people, it is appropriate but inaccurate sometimes when I hear people talk about saving our democracy, and I think to myself, my friends, we've never had a democracy.
How do we build?
We need to create a democracy, and this is it. The door has now opened for us to recreate what was never really never really happened. But let's first start by acknowledging that there has not been a democracy in this country ever.
Yeah.
And we now have an opportunity not to go back, but to move forward. And we have to continue to think about how we move forward, it seems to me. And I'll just say on the hope front, Sahana, you personally and your work, I was very moved by our conversation, our pre-conversation. This is a topic that I have been sort of, like, yeah, that's interesting. Like, but like there's a workshop on that. And I went to a different workshop, like sort of not intentionally, like, I don't want to go to that, but I was just like, yeah, mañana, I'm going to get to that. And I realize now that this is like, something clicked for me around this, personally. So I just want to thank you, for taking the time to come. And I want to thank you too, Liv, for making the connection and saying this is an important conversation for us to have. This is a great, timely conversation for us to have, even as the very holiday of Juneteenth is trying to be squashed, right?
Yeah.
But we'll all be relieved that the American stock market celebrates it. So I guess that makes it an official holiday.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, do not get me started. I've been talking with a lot of the people on the team, including my friend Christian here, that we need a different term for what's happening that we now call capitalism. And I'm not at all sure that what we're in is anything like capitalism. It feels more like oligarchic capture, at some like really deep level. And it's very disorienting to know how to both have to swim in those waters, which were always sort of swampy waters to swim in. Do not get me wrong. They've never been clean waters, but like now it's like, they're not even like this. It's like we've gone down a stream into an entirely different body of water. And sometimes I simply only know that the language we use is somehow inaccurate for what's actually happening. And we're struggling to get language, but you've certainly helped very much with this language, for me around reparations and a culture of repair. And I really am deeply appreciative that you were with us this morning. Before we close, I'm just wanting to see if there's any last questions in the chat, any questions or comments, or if you prefer to come off camera or off mute and speak, we would be delighted to hear from you. Don't be shy if you have a question.
Ask us anything.
Ask us, right. Believe me, Sahana is very adorable. I tested her out. We just tested her before this webinar. She's great. Let's go. Michelle, I see.
I just wanted to say I was able. It may be noisy here. Can you hear me? No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was in Germany last summer, and I did see the Stumbling Stones, and it was really powerful. And I was going to try and share it in the chat, but I can't share photos in the chat. But it was also the most powerful picture I took, though, was of a Stumbling Stones. They're in front of the doors of people, the last place people lived voluntarily before being persecuted by the Nazis. Not all of them were killed, but persecuted by the Nazis. And there was one in front of a door, and then there was graffiti on the wall, which was kill the Nazis, which was in response to the current rise of neo-Nazis in Germany. So it was just really kind of, wow, here we are commemorating it, but we're still fighting it. So I'm not quite sure what to do with that, but yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to share or ask a question? All right. Well, we are at time, so we will close, but I thank you all for your time and attention and your beautiful faces. It's always great to see those of you who are willing to show your camera. And we understand for those of you who are not, it's not a problem. Like Liv says, no pressure, but we're always glad to see you. And just thank you Thank you for your business, certainly, but also thank you for your time and attention to this.